On the morning of a launch, Christina Koch, NASA mission specialist, Artemis II, walks across the gantry in a blue flight suit, and somewhere in the crowd below, a family holds a sign with her name on it. The countdown is live, the fuel is loaded, and if you work a standard government job in the United States, Christina Koch earns roughly what you would expect a mid-level federal employee to make. That is not a metaphor. That is the pay grade. A civilian NASA astronaut earns a standard federal GS-12 or GS-13 salary, averaging approximately $100,000 to $130,000 per year. That is the compensation for sitting on top of a controlled explosion, in a vehicle that has killed crews before, pointed at a destination where no rescue mission can reach you. You are watching this. Your taxes paid for the rocket. The person inside it earns less than your city's fire chief. Walk down the street from any regional airport and find a commercial airline pilot, a person flying the same mathematically predictable route, in the same pressurized tube, between the same two cities, every week for 30 years. That pilot earns upwards of $250,000 annually. The astronaut strapped to a controlled explosion, executing a mission that has killed 14 people in living memory, earns roughly half that amount. Not because the risk is lower, because the employer is the government, and governments do not price risk the way markets do. The Apollo program cost over $25 billion in 1960s money, the equivalent of more than $250 billion today. Every engine, every capsule, every patent produced by that program belonged to the American public. The astronauts who flew it were federal employees. The hardware was federal property. The knowledge was public domain. It no longer exists. What replaced it is a mechanism. The government still assumes the developmental financial risk, the failed tests, the redesigns, the catastrophic losses. But the private conglomerates permanently own the resulting hardware. The taxpayer funds the creation. The corporation holds the title. The astronaut absorbs the mortality. Gone. The risk is public. The ownership is private. In April 2021, Catherine Lueders, NASA's Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations, the official designated source selection authority for the Human Landing System, signed a contract awarding SpaceX $2.89 billion to build the vehicle that will land American astronauts on the moon. The taxpayer funds the vehicle. SpaceX owns it, not leases it, owns it. 2 years later, Blue Origin secured a $3.4 billion contract for a second lunar lander, legally guaranteeing that both primary vehicles, designed to return humans to the lunar surface, are the exclusive corporate property of the personal aerospace companies of two of the wealthiest individuals on Earth. The astronauts described earlier will ride to the moon in hardware they do not own, built with money that was never theirs, toward a surface where the legal question of what happens next remains entirely unresolved. Both vehicles, both privately held, both funded by you. This is not a partnership. A partnership implies shared ownership. What NASA's Human Landing System contracts created is a legal transfer. The government assumes the developmental risk, absorbs the cost of failure during testing, and then permanently surrenders the title deed to the finished product. The corporation receives a government-guaranteed revenue event, builds an asset it will own indefinitely, and retains the right to commercialize that asset for any client it chooses, including clients that are not NASA and not American. The contract is the mechanism. The mechanism is the product. And this is not a one-time transaction. NASA's commercial programs function as an ongoing pipeline, averaging approximately $2 billion to $3 billion per year, transferred continuously from public tax pools directly into private corporate revenue streams, merely to rent access to space that the public paid to develop. Not to own a piece of it, not to hold equity, not to recover the investment when the asset appreciates. To rent. At a rate averaging approximately $2 to $3 billion annually, the American government has become the most reliable paying tenant of an infrastructure it financed into existence. The pipeline does not require legislation to continue. It does not require a vote each year. It is embedded in the contractual architecture of the commercial space program, a structural transfer running on autopilot, compounding with each new contract cycle. The risk remains public. The asset remains private. The payment never stops. The total cost of the Artemis program was projected to exceed $93 billion by the end of 2025. Not $93 billion to own a fleet. Not $93 billion to build a permanent lunar infrastructure that belongs to the American public. $93 billion, the overwhelming majority of which bypassed NASA's internal engineering divisions entirely and flowed directly into the revenue streams and asset valuations of private aerospace corporations. Gwyn Shotwell, President and Chief Operating Officer of SpaceX since 2002, has overseen the company's transformation from a startup burning through venture capital into the single largest recipient of NASA human spaceflight contracts in history. The money moved. The ownership followed. Shotwell runs the operational architecture of a company that now holds the title deed to the vehicle designed to land Americans on the moon. A vehicle whose entire development cost was guaranteed by the federal government before a single weld was made. She did not build this arrangement from nothing. She built it from a contract. And the contract was written by the same government that employs the astronauts who will ride the vehicle she owns. That is not a conflict. Under current law, it is the intended design. By design. Here is where this lands for you personally. Every federal tax payment you have made in the last decade has contributed, in a mathematically direct line, to the asset valuations of privately held aerospace corporations. Not as an investment, not as a loan, not as a stake that earns you anything when the asset appreciates. As a subsidy. You funded the research. You funded the testing. You funded the failures. The corporation absorbed the successes, the patents, the hardware, and the title. You received a press conference. That was the arrangement. The astronaut inside the hardware is the detail the architecture makes invisible. A human being, with a name, a family, a mortgage on a government salary, climbs into a vehicle whose legal owner is not the government that trained them, not the public that funded the machine, but a private corporation whose fiduciary obligation runs to its shareholders. The risk is not shared. The mortality is not distributed. One party in this transaction absorbs 100% of the physical consequence, and that party is the one earning the least. The math is not complicated. The silence around it is. On April 10th, 2026, the Artemis II crew splashed down in the Pacific Ocean after a 10-day lunar flyby, and the headlines called it a triumph of human exploration. It was also something else. It was a publicly funded proof of concept for hardware that belongs to a private corporation, crewed by federal employees on a government salary, completing a mission whose commercial infrastructure cost the public nearly a century's worth of federal space budgets. The person inside that capsule, the one who accepted the mortality, who trained for years on a GS pay scale, earned approximately $274 a day. The vehicle they rode home in was not theirs. It never was. Subscribe to Leviathan Files, because the ledger is public, and someone has to read it.